29 years ago, Caleb Monroe vanished without a trace after boarding his school bus in Harper Springs. Everyone gave up except his mother. Last week, she saw a street musician on TikTok singing a lullaby only she ever hummed. Now, Teresa Monroe was driving across state lines with one question on her lips. Could the man with the guitar be the boy who never made it home? Harper Springs, Arkansas was one of those towns where nothing ever really changed. The streets remained cracked in the same places, the diners still served burnt coffee and overcooked bacon, and every morning the school bus would groan down its familiar route, scooping up sleepy children like clockwork. In this stillness, Teresa Monroe found comfort. Routine was safety, predictability was peace, but on the morning of October 17, 1995, everything broke. That Tuesday had begun with pale sunlight pouring through the kitchen blinds. Teresa had woken early, as usual, to pack her son's lunch, a turkey sandwich, a bruised apple, and a crumpled note with a smiley face. Caleb, 10 years old and growing fast, had been unusually quiet. He'd spent longer than usual staring out the window, spoon untouched in his cereal bowl, his new sneakers tapping restlessly against the linoleum floor. Teresa had tousled his hair as he pulled on his backpack, reminding him not to forget his spelling quiz. Caleb just gave a small smile, the kind kids give when their thoughts are elsewhere. "Love you, Mom," he mumbled, half out the door already. "Love you more," she called after him, the same daily ritual once she could recite in her sleep. From the kitchen window, she watched him jog to the end of the driveway, where the school bus was already wheezing to a stop. Bus number 6, driven by Roy Denton, a man who'd driven that route since Teresa was in high school. She waved out of habit, though Roy never looked up. The door opened with its usual creak. Caleb turned back once and flashed a thumbs up before stepping inside. That was the last time Teresa saw her son. By 10:30 a.m., Teresa received the first phone call from the school secretary, her voice tight and polite. "Ms. Monroe, Caleb hasn't checked into any of his classes today. Did he stay home?" Teresa, who had just finished organizing insurance forms at her clerical job, felt the first tremor of unease. "No, he got on the bus. I watched him." There was a pause on the other end, then a more urgent tone. "We'll check again. Maybe he was dropped off late." But an hour later, another call came. Then another. By noon, Teresa was standing in the principal's office, white-faced, clutching Caleb's lunchbox, which a teacher had found still in his cubby. The school had already called the sheriff. Deputy Lee Harlan was the kind of man who always seemed tired, but today he looked rattled. He'd already spoken with Roy Denton. "Roy says Caleb got off the bus at the school like always," Harold said quietly. Harlan told her he remembers seeing him walk toward the main door. But no other student or teacher remembered seeing Caleb that morning. No security camera showed him entering the building. Teresa's throat closed. "What about the bus camera?" she asked. "Don't you have one now?" Harlan nodded grimly. "Installed 2 weeks ago. Problem is, it malfunctioned this morning. All we got is static. That's not possible," Teresa said quietly. "That's not just coincidence." She didn't yell, didn't cry. Not yet, but something in her chest had begun to spiral. That afternoon, Harper Springs transformed. Police cruisers idled outside the school. Parents gathered in small, murmuring groups. Volunteers passed out flyers printed hastily at the library. "Missing Caleb Monroe, age 10, brown hair, blue hoodie." Teresa drove street by street, calling his name until her voice was ragged. At sunset, search dogs arrived from the next county. They sniffed at Caleb's pillowcase and his socks. They picked up a trail from the bus stop, then lost it behind the old water tower. By midnight, reporters had arrived. A story was already flashing across local news. Boy disappeared after boarding school bus. Roy Denton was interviewed briefly on camera, his lined face expressionless, voice flat. "He got off the bus. That's all I saw." But off camera, Roy told police he couldn't be sure. "Might have been distracted," he admitted. "Mornings all blur together." When pressed about the faulty camera, he shrugged. "Those things break all the time." It wasn't until 2 days later that a maintenance technician flagged something odd in the bus system. The camera hadn't malfunctioned due to wiring, it had been manually unplugged. The tech had found the micro SD card removed from its slot. "Somebody did this on purpose," he told investigators. Teresa was sitting at the sheriff's office when she overheard this. Her heart hammered in her ribs. "So it wasn't a glitch?" she asked. "Somebody didn't want that footage?" Harlan tried to calm her. "We're not jumping to conclusions. Could have been a prank, could have been a mistake. So my son didn't vanish into thin air. Somebody made sure no one saw what happened." And just like that, a quiet town lost its innocence. The silence that followed Caleb's disappearances wasn't empty. It rang like a bell in Teresa's ears, persistent and shrill, filling the corners of her house and the gaps between breaths. At first she lived in a fog of urgency, searching woods, knocking on neighbors' doors, calling every classmate's parent she could reach. But as days bled into weeks, that urgency fermented into obsession. Teresa quit her job 2 months after the disappearance. What use was paperwork when your son might be somewhere cold, afraid, or worse? She transformed her modest living room into a war room. Maps, timelines, hand-drawn bus routes, photos of Caleb taped to every surface. Her house stopped being a home and became a case file. Most of the town moved on after the first winter. The search parties dwindled. Pragmatic, folded Caleb's story into its folklore and tried to heal. But Teresa wouldn't. When the sheriff's office declared they had no viable leads in April 1996, she drove 3 hours to Little Rock and spoke directly with a regional FBI liaison. She brought with her every copy of reports, taped interviews, and a printed spreadsheet detailing school bus inconsistencies. The agent nodded politely but deflected. "Unfortunately, ma'am, this doesn't qualify as an active federal case." Teresa left with a brochure on runaway support groups and a warning about trespassing at state buildings. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, a single phrase burning behind her eyes. "If I don't keep looking, no one will." So she kept looking. Over the next 4 years, Teresa handed out nearly 25,000 flyers. She posted in laundromats, grocery store windows, and truck stops across 4 states. She printed "Ask Me About Caleb Monroe" buttons and wore one on every jacket. She got banned from 2 department stores for slipping flyers inside shirt pockets. She canvassed neighborhoods alone, from Memphis to Albuquerque, refusing to stop until her gas tank and funds were both dry. Most nights, she slept in her car. She started attending missing persons conferences where she met other parents like her, thin, tired people whose smiles twitched on delight, whose eyes never quite settled. There she found temporary solidarity and learned to talk like an investigator: timeline inconsistencies, probable displacement, off-grid behavioral grooming. She became fluent in suspicion. In 1997, a full 2 years after the disappearances, she received a postcard from Austin, Texas. It was wedged between grocery coupons and pre-approved credit card offers. The front showed a blurry skyline, one of those generic sunset views sold at highway rest stops. Teresa barely glanced at it. She flipped it over, blanked no message, no return address, no stamp, just postmarked, from Travis County. She tossed it in the recycling bin without another thought. At the time, she was dealing with a local TV station that had backed out of airing Caleb's story due to low viewer engagement. But weeks later, while reorganizing her campaign files, she remembered the card. Something about it itched at her. She retrieved it from a box of junk mail she'd half forgotten. The postmark matched the date of Caleb's 11th birthday. Her chest tightened. She brought it to the sheriff's office, demanding they run fingerprint analysis. Deputy Harlan looked uncomfortable, eyes flicking to his desk phone like it might rescue him. "We can send it to the lab, Teresa, but I need to remind you, it's not conclusive." Lab results came back, smudged, partial prints, inconclusive. But in Teresa's mind, it was proof. Her son was alive, or at least had been, on his birthday, in a city 9 hours south. That postcard became her new North Star. She bought a state map of Texas and traced every Greyhound route into Austin. She wrote to bus drivers, motel clerks, food truck vendors. She even contacted psychic hotlines, if only because she had exhausted everything rational. Every year on October 17th, she held a vigil in front of the Harper Springs courthouse. At first, a crowd gathered. Then it was just her, holding a candle, surrounded by laminated photos clipped to stakes in the grass. One local reporter still covered it annually, more out of habit than hope. In 1998, Teresa hired a private investigator with her late father's life insurance payout. The man's name was Donovan Franks. He wore mismatched shoes and smelled like menthols, but he worked cheap. Teresa showed him her wall of evidence. He listened without interruption, then tapped a thumb against a map. "You think the postcard came from the boy?" She nodded. "I know it did." Donovan nodded once, then disappeared for 3 weeks. When he returned, he had a folder of gas station receipts, a blurry photo of a guitar case left at a bus terminal, and a single comment. "There's a busker down there, east side of Congress Avenue, been there since spring '96. About the right age. Teresa bought a bus ticket the next day, but when she got there, the boy was gone." Moved on, like smoke on wind. The vendor who'd seen him said he might have gone west. That clue died on the sidewalk. Donovan kept looking for another month, then sent a final invoice and vanished. Teresa suspected he'd taken a better-paying job or maybe just lost hope. But she couldn't. By 2002, Caleb would have been 17. Teresa had already written 34 letters to schools, job agencies, and juvenile programs in Texas, asking if anyone by the name of Isaac, or CC, or any variant had ever registered. Most never responded. A few replied politely but unhelpfully. One simply sent back a sticky note. "No match. Sorry." Through it all, Teresa never stopped updating her case log. She added every rumor, every whisper, every person who claimed they'd seen a kid who looked like him behind a gas station or on a church bulletin. Each night she would sit in Caleb's room, untouched since 1995, and write a letter to him in a notebook she never mailed. "Dear Caleb, today I spoke to a woman in Houston who saw a boy playing guitar outside her shop. He had the same eyes. I asked her to take a photo next time. Please be safe. Love, Mom." She never missed a day. But by 2005, the pages were beginning to bleed together, the ink smearing from time or tears or both. What she couldn't know, was that one of her flyers had made its way into a Salvation Army drop box near San Antonio. Someone had used it as scrap paper. Another had been pinned to a tree outside a shuttered rest stop in Waco. It flapped there for weeks before a boy with dreadlocks and a second-hand guitar noticed the photo. He didn't recognize the name, but the face haunted him. And so, on a rainy night in late spring, he scribbled down a name he didn't fully understand, licked the back of a tourist postcard, and dropped it in a mailbox. Teresa never knew what happened to Roy Denton after the first year. After he gave his official statement to police and attended a single community meeting, mumbling through vague apologies and dodging reporters, he vanished. Officially, he was on unpaid leave from the school district, citing mental strain. Unofficially, most townsfolk whispered he'd run from guilt. Teresa had her suspicions, but back then, she was too consumed with the search to chase ghosts. What she didn't know was that 5 weeks after Caleb's disappearance, Roy sold his modest trailer just outside Harper Springs for half its worth, packed everything into a rusting Chevy flatbed, and drove south until the county line disappeared in the rearview mirror. Some outside Baton Rouge, he changed the license plates. By the time he reached Oklahoma, he had a new name, John Randall. The transformation wasn't complicated. A forged ID, a set of fake Social Security numbers bought off a truck stop acquaintance, and a new job as a long-haul driver under a shadowy subcontractor who never asked too many questions. Roy, now John, ditched his cap and shaved the thin line of his mustache. He wore sunglasses even at dawn and avoided conversations. If anyone asked about his past, he'd say he lost his family in a fire. Most people didn't pry. The truth, however, was darker and more twisted than Roy ever let on, not because he had something to hide, but because he believed, truly believed, that he had saved a life. In Roy's mind, the day he drove away with Caleb wasn't a kidnapping. It was a rescue. He never planned it in the usual sense. There were no maps, no lists, no gloves or chloroform. What there was instead was time, years of watching. Roy had been driving that same school route through his side mirror. Most he forgot. Caleb was different. The boy always sat quietly in the third row of window seat. He stared out like he was watching the world slip away. His shoelaces were always untied. Once, Roy saw a small bruise behind his ear when Caleb leaned to grab his backpack. Another time, Caleb flinched when a classmate high-fived him. Alone, those things meant little. But over time, Roy began to build a picture, one shaped less by fact and more by the stories he convinced himself were true. The final seed of delusion came from a brief, Off-handed exchange one morning in late September 1995. Caleb's stepfather, Brad, Teresa's new husband at the time, was late walking Caleb to the stop. He was still in his work overalls, looking sleep-deprived and irritated. As Caleb jogged to the bus, Brad muttered loud enough for Royal to hear, "Don't give them any trouble today, or you'll be sorry." He laughed afterward, a tired, hollow laugh, but Roy didn't hear the humor. That moment burrowed into him. He carried it like a stone in his gut. Over the next weeks, Roy watched closer. He saw how Caleb sat hunched sometimes, how he hesitated before boarding, how he once winced when swinging his backpack onto his shoulder. He thought about his own childhood, a stepfather with cruel hands and a mother too afraid to speak. He remembered the nights spent under porches or in haylofts just to avoid being home. The memories bled into his present, and somewhere in that haze of confusion and good intention gone wrong, Roy decided to act. The morning of October 17th wasn't chosen at random. He had seen Teresa drive away earlier than usual. Brad hadn't shown up at the bus stop. Caleb looked more withdrawn than ever. The bus camera had only recently been installed, and Roy had spent the weekend studying its wiring. He'd removed the memory card before his route began. No one saw Caleb board. No one saw him leave. When the other kids disembarked, Roy told him quietly, "We're going somewhere safe." Caleb, too stunned or too obedient, followed. Roy drove past the school and out of town. He told Caleb they were going to visit someone who would help, that it was a surprise. Caleb didn't speak much. In truth, he was too confused, too young to fight. Roy took him across 3 states in 2 days. He rented a room in a roadside motel, gave Caleb a different name, Isaac, and told him that his mother had agreed to the plan, that she had sent him away for his own good. He fed him cheap burgers, taught him to lie about his age, and kept him moving. Over time, Caleb stopped asking questions. Roy taught him how to change his name, how to avoid uniforms, how to disappear in a crowd. They lived in trailer parks, slept in truck beds, and drifted between low-rent towns where no one cared who you were. Roy never laid a hand on Caleb, never shouted. He believed himself to be the boy's savior. But love warped by delusion is still a prison. Caleb wasn't allowed to call anyone. He wasn't enrolled in school. Roy said it was too dangerous. The government, he explained, wanted to take him back to bad people. Every time Caleb showed curiosity about his past, Roy offered a new lie. "She died in a crash. I'm the only one who wanted you. They were going to hurt you. I saved you." At night, Caleb heard Roy talk in his sleep. Sometimes the man muttered apologies. Sometimes he repeated Teresa's name. But by the time Caleb turned 13, he no longer believed in the world he'd left behind. That world had stopped looking for him, or so he thought. What Roy never expected was how much Caleb would remember. Not all at once, but in flashes, a cereal bowl, the smell of lavender detergent. A lullaby hummed in whispers. Roy tried to drown those fragments with static, late-night infomercials, truck stop radio, bedtime lectures about the cruelty of people who abandon children. But memories don't vanish. They bury themselves deep, and somewhere along the back roads of Louisiana, they began to dig their way back up. By the time Caleb turned 11, the name Caleb was gone. He was Isaac Green now, and he said it aloud every morning in case someone asked. Not that many people did. He had no teachers to call roll, no classmates to whisper his name in the hall, just a laminated slip Roy gave him that said, "Eth Allen, age 11, homeschooled, traveling with guardian." That piece of paper, Roy claimed, was all they needed to avoid trouble. After she'd left Egypt, Isaac lived in a series of borrowed corners, truck beds, rest stops, borrowed motel rooms, and trailers rented under fake names. Each place smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. Sometimes they stayed for weeks, other times only a night. Roy kept them on the move, working freight jobs under the table, unloading traits for cash and any official record. He taught Isaac how to keep his head down, how to blend in, how to walk like he belonged no matter where they were. But for all his lectures on survival, Roy refused to let Isaac attend school. "They'll ask questions," he'd say. "They'll track you down. Do you want to go back to those people?" When Isaac asked what people, Roy would sigh and look out the window. "You're better off not remembering. The only education Isaac received came from an old man named Charlie, who lived in a trailer behind a junkyard outside of Shreveport. Charlie had long gray hair and arthritis in his knees, but his hands were still nimble on a guitar neck. Roy met him during a job hauling scrap metal, and for some reason trusted him enough to let Isaac stay there while he ran deliveries. Charlie handed Isaac a battered acoustic guitar and said, "You learn this, you'll never be truly alone." That line stuck. Charlie didn't ask questions. He just played blues riffs and showed Isaac how to finger chords until his knuckles ached. For hours, they'd sit on overturned milk crates behind the trailer, strumming over the hum of cicadas. Isaac found solace in music, the way the vibrations echoed in his chest, the strange satisfaction of a chord finally ringing clean. Charlie was the only person who ever spoke to him like he was more than a shadow. But even Charlie wasn't immune to Roy's rules. He was told never to ask Isaac about his past, never to mention school, and under no circumstances to give him a phone. Isaac didn't know how to push back. His world had no borders, no calendar, no guarantee. He didn't know what a semester was, or how many states America had. What he knew was how to tune a guitar by ear, how to sleep without turning on the light, and how to disappear into a crowd. Roy kept a close eye on everything. He didn't beat Isaac, didn't scream, didn't lock him in closets, but he controlled him with stories. Every time Isaac asked about his real family, Roy would look deeply hurt, like the question itself was betrayal. "Your mom," he'd begin slowly, as if mourning, "died in a car accident just after I got you out. She was trying to leave town, lost control on the highway." Isaac, eyes wide, always fell silent. "I tried to find your dad, but he was gone too." "You don't remember because trauma makes the brain forget. That's normal." Isaac nodded, like it made sense. He was just a boy after all, and grief was the kind of fog you didn't argue with. The few fragments he did recall, a smell, a voice, the shape of someone's handwriting, he shoved deep inside and labeled dream. Roy called them false memories, side effects of confusion. "Worth matters," he'd say, "is that you're safe now." He told Isaac he was lucky. "Most kids like you don't get a second chance. The system chews them up. I saved you." Isaac didn't know what the system was, only that it was somewhere cold and hungry. The older he got, the more the story unraveled at the edges. Why didn't they have an address? Why did Roy hide whenever they passed through border checkpoints or way stations? Why did he throw away mail unopened? But the lies had been repeated so often, so quietly, that they stopped sounding like lies. They were just the rules of his world. When Isaac turned 13, Charlie gave him the guitar he'd learned on. The frets were worn, the body dented, but to Isaac it was treasure. That same week, Roy decided they needed to move again. Charlie hugged Isaac one last time, whispered, "Don't stop playing, kid," and handed him a folded napkin with a mailing address and $5 inside. Roy took the napkin and burned it in an ashtray before they left the parking lot. "People like that mean well," he muttered, "but they don't understand what's at stake." Isaac watched the paper curl into ash. That night they slept in a borrowed van near the Texas border. Isaac tried to write a song using only 3 chords and the names he remembered from a dream. Mom, home, Caleb. He didn't know why those words tasted like salt. By 14, Isaac had stopped asking questions. He just played. Gas station corners, city sidewalks, anywhere the echo didn't bounce too loud. Roy let him perform as long as he kept his hat low and used the name Miles when people asked. "No one remembers a drifter with a fake name," Roy said. "That's what keeps us alive." Isaac played for change, ate gas station sandwiches, and kept moving. He wrote songs he didn't understand and hummed lullabies that made his chest ache. At night he stared at motel ceilings and wondered what it meant to belong somewhere. Roy rarely mentioned the past anymore. He didn't need to. Isaac's life had become a loop, new town, new room, same silence, but still, every now and then, he dreamed of lavender soap and cereal bowls and someone whispering, "I love you." He always woke up before the face came into focus. And so, years rolled on. The boy once called Caleb Monroe disappeared from public records. In his place was a young man with calloused fingers, haunted eyes, and a name he didn't choose. Isaac Green. Musician. No known family, no birth certificate, just a memory of a voice saying, in the spring of 2024, Austin hummed with the kind of strange energy only found in cities where old soul and new money collided. On a side street not far from South Congress Avenue, where the smell of barbecued brisket tangled with exhaust fumes and sweat, Isaac Green played under the shade of a leaning sycamore. He perched on a folding stool, guitar resting against his thigh, thumb flicking against strings with the ease of repetition and muscle memory. The blues poured from him, not as performance, but as proof. Proof he still existed, still felt, still searched for something he couldn't name. His voice, honey-worn and smoky from years of silence and concrete, drifted through the alley like it belonged there. He wasn't famous, not yet. He was just another street musician, surrounded by coffee shop chatter and the occasional clink of coins dropped into his guitar case. But among the crowd that day stood a man who hadn't meant to stop. His name was Walter Briggs, a retired detective from Fayetteville. He was in town visiting his daughter, killing time before brunch, when he heard a sound that froze him mid-step. There was something about that voice, gentle but cracked, old but unlearned, that tugged at a file he hadn't touched in over 2 decades. He turned toward the sound and saw a young man, mid-20s, dreadlocks pulled back, eyes half shut in concentration. It wasn't just the voice. It was the tilt of his head, the slope of his shoulders. Briggs felt the breath catch in his chest. In 1995, he'd assisted in the search for Caleb Monroe. He'd driven to Harper Springs with a box of child interviews and a deputy who smoked too much. He remembered the case because of the mother, Teresa, how relentless she was, how she'd slept in her car outside the sheriff's office just to be the first to read new reports. Briggs stepped closer now, heart thudding. The singer hit a note that wasn't part of the melody, a downward slide that almost sounded like a sob. Briggs snapped a picture on his phone, just one. Then he walked away, unsure if he'd just seen a ghost. That night, the photo stayed open on his screen for an hour. He searched the name Isaac Green Austin, musician, and found a TikTok clip posted by a college student 2 nights prior. In the comments, someone had written, "His vibe is so familiar, like I know him from somewhere." Briggs didn't sleep. The next morning he called a number he hadn't dialed in 15 years. Teresa Monroe answered on the second ring. "Monroe," he began carefully, "this is Walter Briggs. I worked your son's case." Silence. Then a single word, "Why?" Briggs exhaled slowly. "I think I might have seen him. In Austin. A street performer. But I can't be sure." Teresa's voice broke. "Don't do this to me unless you know." "I don't," he admitted, "but I thought you deserved the chance to look." Meanwhile, halfway across the state, Teresa's niece, Maya, was scrolling TikTok while waiting for laundry to finish. A clip autoplay played, blues guitar, warm vocals, a young man in a linen shirt. She paused. Something about his expression made her frown. She watched it again, and again. She didn't know why, but she downloaded it and brought it to Teresa the next day. "I know it's probably nothing," she said, handing her aunt the phone. "But look." Teresa almost didn't take it. She was used to false alarms, cruel hopes, but the moment the screen lit up and the video played, she stopped breathing. The camera panned up from the guitar to the singer's face. He sang with his eyes closed, but when he turned slightly, just for a second, the camera caught the left side of his neck. Teresa dropped the phone. Maya caught it before it hit the floor. "Auntie?" Teresa didn't answer. She bent down slowly, lifted the phone again, and paused the video at the exact frame. Just behind the singer's earlobe, there was a faint, cocoa-colored smudge. Teresa didn't need to squint. She knew that birthmark. She'd traced it with her finger every night until Caleb was 10. It was shaped like a comma, always made her think he had more story left to tell. "It's him," she whispered. Maya put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure?" Teresa's eyes welled. "Yes, I'd know that face anywhere, that voice, even now." With Detective Andrea Lopez, now head of the Cold Cases Unit in Little Rock. Teresa had stayed in touch with her for years, forwarding every false lead, every strange tip, every birthday reflection. Lopez listened carefully, asked for the video, and promised to begin background checks immediately. Teresa, hands shaking, replayed the clip again and again. The voice didn't just sound like Caleb's, it carried the same note he used to hit when he hummed to himself before bed. She remembered him sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with his toy guitar, making up lyrics about planets and rocket ships. And now here he was, alive, breathing, singing in Austin under a name she didn't recognize. Her brain flooded with questions. Did he remember her? Was he safe? Who had taken him? She pulled up the TikTok account, scrolled through every clip. Some were grainy, some clearer. All showed the same man with weathered hands and a hesitant smile. She watched one where he laughed mid-song. The dimple appeared. Left side only. Teresa clutched her chest. That dimple had been Caleb's tell. He'd use it to get extra dessert, to sneak out of bedtime. She texted Lopez a list of identifiers: birthmark, dimple, posture, vocal cadence. Lopez called back 30 minutes later. We're pulling known aliases. His online handle is linked to a Cash App registered as Miles Carter. There's a performance schedule pinned to the account. Catter? Karina repeated, stunned. His middle name was Jordan. Lopez paused. That could be a stretch, or it could mean everything. Teresa's heart hammered. He's using parts of his name. That's him trying to remember. We'll confirm quietly, Lopez said. Don't engage directly yet. We don't want to spook him. But Teresa had already pressed follow. That night she lay in bed, replaying old voicemails she'd saved over the years. She imagined how she'd approach him. Would he know her? Would he run? The next day a new video went live. Different clothes, same birthmark, same song. Teresa stepped off the bus in Austin with her knees trembling, her breath shallow, and her fingers wrapped tightly around the frayed handle of a suitcase that hadn't left her attic in over a decade. It was the same one she had packed when she traveled to New Orleans in 2007, chasing a lead that turned into nothing. But this time felt different. This time she had seen him. Not a blurry newspaper clipping, not a voicemail someone claimed to hear, but a face, a birthmark, a voice that lived in her memory. Caleb. She couldn't say the name out loud, not yet. She called Detective Lopez as soon as she reached her motel and updated her. Lopez had already coordinated with local law enforcement to locate the performer known as Isaac Green. He was scheduled to play that Thursday evening at a food truck fair in East. Teresa could barely sleep for the next 2 nights. Her niece Maya flew in on the second day to stay with her, holding her hand through every panic attack, every hypothetical conversation rehearsed in tears. When Thursday arrived, Teresa wore Caleb's favorite color, a soft blue blouse, and pinned a photo of him at age 10 inside her wallet. She and Maya arrived early, blending into the crowd of families and couples and street food vendors. When he appeared on the makeshift wooden platform, Teresa's breath left her body. He was taller than she remembered, cleaner, that locks tied back loosely, but the curve of his brow, the line of his jaw, and the way his fingers curled naturally around the guitar neck was him. She didn't approach immediately. She listened. His voice floated out with a quiet force that cracked something open inside her. When the set ended, she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said gently, barely above a whisper. He looked at her with polite confusion. "Yeah?" Teresa's voice quivered. I think I know you." His brows drew together. "Don't think so, ma'am. You're Caleb Monroe." He shook his head with the certainty of someone defending himself against danger. "I'm Isaac Green. I've always been—" She reached into her wallet and handed him the photo. "This is you. That's your birthmark under your ear. That's your smile." He glanced at the photo, jaw tightening, then handed it back. "I don't know this kid," he said evenly. "I'm sorry. I think you're mistaken." Teresa felt her knees wobble. May caught her before she fell. Isaac turned to leave. "Wait," Maya called, pulling out her phone. "We can take a test, a DNA test. You don't have to believe us, just give us a chance to prove it." He hesitated. Something in his eyes flickered, or maybe pity. "I'm not who you think I am," he said quietly. "But if it helps you move on, fine. I'll take your test." The next morning, all 3 of them met at a private clinic, recommended by a local contact. Isaac sat stiffly in the waiting room, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. Teresa watched him, memorizing every movement, every habit, how he tapped his foot when nervous, how he glanced at the floor when thinking. They swabbed inside his cheek and collected Teresa's sample as well. The technician told them results would be ready in 72 hours. They waited in silence. The hours passed in torturous slow motion. Teresa rewatched his performance videos, compared the photo from the flyer to his current face, wrote down questions he might answer if he remembered anything. 3 days later, the results arrived. The clinic receptionist handed her an envelope with a clinical smile. Teresa opened it in the parking lot. She scanned the top line, her heart already racing ahead. Then she read it again. Result: no match. Probability of maternity: 0%. Her vision blurred. Maya took the paper from her hands, reading it aloud again, confused. Teresa couldn't breathe. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." She folded over in her seat, body racked with sobs. "It's him, I know it. This is wrong." Maya tried to soothe her, but Teresa pushed her hand away. "He has the birthmark, the dimple. His voice, Maya, it's his voice." She looked around wildly, like the truth might appear in the asphalt. That night she called Detective Lopez, sobbing. "It says he's not my son, but it has to be." Lopez listened carefully. "Tirothy, I believe you. That clinic doesn't have accreditation with the National Forensic Registry. Mistakes happen, especially if someone mislabeled a sample. Let me run it through our lab, please." Teresa nodded through tears. "He thinks I'm crazy. I saw it in his eyes." "We'll figure it out," Lopez promised. "Send me everything. We'll do it right." Teresa barely slept. The next morning, Maya knocked gently and found her aunt on the motel balcony, holding the old laminated flyer. Her eyes were bloodshot. "What if I scared him off?" Teresa asked hoarsely. "What if he never speaks to us again?" Maya hugged her. "Then we find another way, just like you always have." Meanwhile, across town, Isaac sat in a corner booth of a diner, fingers still tingling from where the swab had touched his cheek. The woman's voice haunted him. The photo wouldn't leave his mind. That boy looked like him, exactly like him, and the name, Caleb, triggered something, a sound, a smell, a lullaby? He shook it off. Roy had always told him memories lied, that people lied, that women like her only wanted to hurt him. But still, when the waitress brought his coffee, he asked without thinking, "Do you believe people can forget their real name?" She smiled kindly. "Honey, people forget all sorts of things. Doesn't mean they're lost forever." Ethan stared into his cup, unsure why the answer made his throat ache. The motel room was too quiet. Teresa sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope from the failed DNA test unopened on the nightstand because Maya had thrown it in the trash earlier that morning, but somehow it had found its way back out. She didn't know what to do with it, just that it was still there, like a mocking whisper. Her heart said one thing, the paper another. In desperation, she reopened the TikTok app, scrolled through Isaac's page, searching for anything she might have missed. Video after video played, songs performed under lamplight, in alleys, near train tracks, but one clip caught her attention, not because of the melody, but because of the lyrics. It was a rough acoustic number, posted without caption, the audio barely clear over the street noise. Isaac was hunched slightly forward, eyes closed, singing quietly to a group of children gathered near his feet. The moment she heard the second verse, her hand flew to her mouth. The lyrics were unmistakable. "Row your boat past fireflies. Human this star's good night. Mama's voice is candlelight. Keeps the dark from bite." Teresa froze. Those weren't just lyrics, they were hers. She had written them in a faded brown notebook in 1993, when Caleb was still afraid of thunderstorms. The lullaby had never been published, never shared. She had sung it to him in the dark, sitting beside his bed, fingers stroking his forehead, until he fell asleep. It was a mother's lullaby, private and sacred. She dug through her suitcase, unzipped a hidden pouch, and pulled out the old notebook, its spine frayed, the pages stiff from age. She turned to the page, and there it was, written in her looping cursive, exactly as Isaac had sung it. Teresa ran to Maya's room. "He sang this," she gasped, waving the notebook in one hand and her phone in the other. Maya frowned, then read the words, comparing them to the video. Her face paled. "He couldn't have known this, right?" Teresa shook her head. "Unless he remembered, not fully, but somehow inside. This." Maya grabbed the phone, opened the video again, and hit record on her own device to save a copy. We have to show this to Detective Lopez. Within the hour, they were on a call. Lopez listened quietly as Teresa explained, then had the video and the notebook sent to the forensic linguist the department occasionally consulted. I'll have someone authenticate the handwriting and analyze lyrical origin. If it checks out, it's the strongest emotional marker we've had. Teresa clung to that word, marker. It meant something had survived. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Lopez had reopened the cold case files for review, this time with a new analyst assigned. A young recruit named Camille, fresh out of training and obsessed with analog formats, offered to inventory the contents of the 1995 evidence boxes. Most of them had already been digitized and flagged inconclusive, but Camille noticed something strange. A VHS tape labeled Bus Camp Oct 17 was listed as damaged and unreadable, but it hadn't actually been reformatted or preserved. She decided to run it through an old player still gathering dust in the AV room. The tape was static heavy, but resolution poor, but 37 seconds in, it showed movement, more than the file notes had indicated. The bus door opened, and silhouettes moved in and out. Then, a frame that made Camille freeze. Roy Denton exiting the bus at an unofficial stop, looking over his shoulder, then motioning to someone behind him. The timestamp confirmed the deviation. The bus route should have been 2 miles further east. Camille immediately flagged it for Lopez. Then hours, the footage was cleaned up and reviewed by 2 more officers. It directly contradicted Roy's statement from 1995, in which he claimed to have driven directly from the last pickup point to the school without stopping. Lopez called Teresa. "We've found a break," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "There's video from the day of the disappearance. It shows Roy leaving the route. He stopped down slowly." "You mean he stopped?" "Illegally," he lied. "And the boy?" "Don't see his face, just a shape behind Roy." "But it lines up." Teresa clutched the phone, words stuck in her throat. Lopez continued. "I've already issued a formal request to reopen the case under new evidence. The tape alone warrants it. Combined with your lyrics, we may be able to obtain a warrant for Roy, Randall's, last known address." Teresa nodded, more to herself than anyone else. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, Isaac posted a new video. He didn't sing, he just spoke to the camera, softly. "Some songs stay with you, even when you forget where they came from. Sometimes you wake up humming something you think you made up, but it's older than your bones. I had a dream last night. I think someone used to hum it to me." Teresa replayed that video 15 times, each word another heartbeat returning. Isaac hadn't slept much since the encounter outside the food truck fair. The woman's face kept flashing behind his eyelids, those tearful eyes, that photo, the way she said his name like it belonged to him. For most of his life, he had pushed away the questions, ignored the slivers of memory that didn't fit the version of the past Roy had given him. But now the questions had teeth. They bit at him as he tried to fall asleep, gnawed through the comfort of denial, and left him staring at cracked motel ceilings, wondering why certain smells felt familiar, why some songs stirred grief flea-bottom. Teresa didn't wait long after the VHS confirmation. She returned to Isaac Street set the following Sunday, this time accompanied by Detective Lopez and a federal DNA specialist from the Missing Persons Rapid Match Program. She stood at a respectful distance as Isaac finished his set, then stepped forward slowly, hands visible, no sudden moves. "Isaac," she said, voice steadier now, "I'm not here to pressure you, but the first test? It was wrong. There was a lab error. This team is with the Department of Justice. They can run a confirmed DNA match through the National Parent Offspring Database. You don't have to believe me, yet. Just believe the science." Isaac stared at her, then at the woman in a dark jacket holding a sterile kit. He looked like he wanted to run, but something held him in place, maybe her eyes, or maybe the lingering lyrics he couldn't explain. "Okay," he whispered. One last time. They led him to a private room in the back of the community center where he usually stored his equipment. Teresa remained in the hallway, hands clenched into fists. The test was quick. A cheek swab sealed in a tamper-proof container, signed and witnessed by federal officials. Isaac barely said a word. Lopez thanked him for his cooperation, then assured him results would return within 48 hours. "You don't have to speak to her again," she added gently. "But if you want answers, this will give them." That night, he didn't perform. He walked aimlessly through East Austin, past murals and late-night taco trucks, wondering why the sound of a lullaby had made his chest tighten. He sat under a footbridge and played the melody again, softer now. "Row, row, row your boat." The words came unbidden, not just the public version, but a softer variation, a hum layered beneath the words. He blinked. A memory surfaced like film grain sharpening. A dark room, a hand stroking his forehead, a soft voice whispering off-key to calm the thunder outside. He heard his own voice, smaller, scared. "Mama again?" And then her reply, half laugh, half said, "Only if you close your eyes first." Isaac stumbled to his feet. His guitar hung loose by the strap as he walked back to the motel and sat up all night replaying the scene, unsure if it was real or a story he'd invented. At 7:46 a.m. the next morning, Teresa's phone rang. She answered on the first ring. "Ms. Monroe," said Lopez's voice, calm but weighted. "Got the results. Maternity probability 99.99%. Teresa didn't cry this time. She didn't scream. She just closed her eyes, exhaled through her nose, and whispered, "Thank you." Lopez continued, "We'll inform Isaac personally, but I wanted you to hear it first. You've waited long enough." Teresa sat on the edge of her motel bed and stared out the window. The city beyond just waking up. Birds circled power lines. Someone walked their dog across the lot. She didn't know what came next, but she knew something had ended. The not knowing. The fear of being wrong. That afternoon, Lopez arranged for a quiet meet in a secure office space near the station. Isaac arrived first, escorted by a plainclothes officer. Teresa waited inside, photos spread across the table. School drawings, third-grade report cards, a paper rocket they had built together on a rainy Sunday. When Isaac entered, he froze. The sight of those artifacts cracked something open in his chest. Teresa stood slowly, unsure what to say. He spoke first. "You used to sing me that song, didn't you?" Teresa's breath caught. "Every night. I remember your voice now." "Not all of it, but enough." He sat down across from her, fingers trembling. "Why would someone lie about all that?" Teresa reached across the table and placed her hand lightly on his. "Because they wanted to control you." "But you were always more than they could hold." Ethan looked down at her fingers, the shape of them. His throat tightened. "I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know right now," she said. "We'll figure it out together." He exhaled, slow and shaking. "I keep hearing that song, even when it's quiet. That means your heart remembered," she said gently, "even when your mind couldn't." He looked up at her then, eyes wet. "I want to know everything." When the DNA results were officially filed and confirmed in the national system, the case no longer belonged to emotion. It belonged to law. Detective Lopez submitted a formal report to the district attorney's office, reopening the long-dormant missing child case from Harper Springs. Within 48 hours, a task force was assembled to cross-references every alias, location, and employment record tied to the name John Randall. A retired data analyst who had volunteered part-time for cold case research recognized the name from a utility bill in rural Arkansas. It listed a single occupant at a rental property near the outskirts of Miller County, barely 2 miles from where Roy Denton had lived before vanishing from Harper Springs. The pattern was too familiar. A background sweep of John Randall's driver's license photo revealed a face aged by decades but unmistakably Roy Denton. The same high forehead, the permanent crow's feet etched around suspicious eyes. Lopez received the hit just before noon on a Thursday. She called Teresa first. "We have him," she said. "Roy never went far. He's been living under the radar, doing odd jobs, hiding in plain sight." Teresa didn't speak right away. When she did, it was only to say, "Tell me when it's over." A warrant was issued that same evening. The following morning, a joint unit from the Arkansas State Police and the U.S. Marshals Service surrounded a one-story house nestled behind overgrown hedges and rusted fencing. Roy answered the door, shirtless, holding a coffee mug, blinking like he'd just woken from a dream. When the officers asked him to confirm his identity, he didn't lie. He simply nodded and said, "I figured this was coming." He didn't resist arrest. He didn't ask why. In custody, Roy remained eerily calm. He waived his right to an attorney during the initial interview and spoke clearly, as if explaining a misunderstood favor. "I never hurt him," he said. "I gave him everything I could." When Lopez arrived at the holding center for formal questioning, she brought with her a thick folder of evidence: video stills from the VHS tape, photographs of Isaac as a child, DNA documentation, and a transcript of Roy's old testimony from 1995. She placed them one by one on the table without saying a word. Roy sat back, watching her with a quiet detachment. "You lied to police," Lopez said finally. "You left your route. You took a child." Roy didn't flinch. "Because I had to," he said. "Nobody else was going to do the right thing." "The right thing," Lopez echoed. "You abducted a boy from his family." "No," Roy replied firmly. "I rescued him," he went on to describe, in haunting detail, his perception of Caleb's home life. He cited bruises he claimed to have seen, fearful glances he insisted were cries for help, and the statement Brad, the stepfather, had made at the bus stop about punishment. "That boy didn't flinch like a kid afraid of getting grounded," Roy said. "He flinched like I used to, but when Lopez pressed him about the decision to flee across state lines, to change his identity, to isolate Caleb from all contact for nearly 2 decades, Roy showed no remorse. He needed a clean slate," he said. "You think the system would have done better? Foster homes, shelters. You ever seen what happens in those places?" "You're not a judge, Roy," Lopez snapped. "You're not a social worker. You made a choice that destroyed a family." Roy's hands were steady. "I gave him music. I gave him peace." "You gave him lies," Lopez corrected. Then she laid down the final piece, an old spiral-bound notebook found during the search of school bus routes, seating charts, hand-drawn maps of Harper Springs and surrounding areas, and most chilling of all, entries dating back 2 years before Caleb vanished. The earliest note read, "Third row, always sits alone a sign, hesitates on cold mornings, possible signs of distress, monitor further." Lopez tapped the page. "You didn't make a split-second decision. You stalked him, you planned the notebook, then at her. I was watching, because no one else was." He leaned forward slightly. "And you know what? He turned out fine. He's alive, he plays guitar, he's strong." "He's broken," Lopez countered. "He doesn't know how to trust, and now he has to rebuild 27 years of truth you stole." Roy exhaled through his nose, slow and resigned. "I'd do it again." When news of the arrest reached Teresa, she sat on the edge of her motel bed, holding her breath, waiting for the tears that never came. Instead, she felt something heavier. Not rage, not vindication, but sorrow. Not just for what Roy had done, but for the version of Caleb that might have been. Across town, Isaac was sitting with Maya in a small cafe, fiddling with a paper napkin. He didn't know yet. Teresa hadn't told him. Not the full story, not the name, not what came next. But he could feel something shifting. The courtroom was full but silent, the kind of hush that weighs down every breath and stretches seconds into centuries. Teresa sat in the front row, beside Detective Lopez and Maya, her hands folded tight in her lap, the muscles in her jaw tense but controlled. On the other side of the room, Isaac sat straighter than usual, suit jacket burrow-deck, hair pulled back, eyes steady but not unkind. He hadn't spoken to Roy since the day he'd learned the full truth. Hadn't wanted to, but today he had asked to be present, to hear the sentence with his own ears, not for closure, but for context, to mark the end of a chapter even if the pages still trembled. The judge recited the charges with deliberate clarity: aggravated kidnapping, identity fraud, obstruction of justice, and willful endangerment of a minor. There was no outburst, no argument, no final plea. Roy Denton, also known as John Randall, remained emotionless, hands folded in front of him, as if watching someone else's trial. He had pleaded guilty, perhaps hoping for leniency, but the weight of the evidence, especially the premeditated notes from his journal, had obliterated any chance of that. The judge's voice echoed, 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A murmur passed through the room, not of surprise, but of finality. Roy was led out in shackles, glancing once at Isaac, but saying nothing. Isaac didn't blink. Afterward, in the courthouse courtyard, reporters hovered at a respectful distance, snapping photos but not shouting questions. Teresa turned to her son and reached for his hand. "It's done," she said quietly. Isaac nodded but didn't respond. He looked up at the sky instead, as if trying to recognize its shade. Later that week, he signed the paperwork to legally reclaim his birth name, Caleb Jordan Monroe. The DMV photo felt surreal. He stared at the image of himself, his real name printed beneath, and felt a strange stillness settle into his chest. Teresa laminated a copy of the certificate and kept it tucked behind an old photo of Caleb in second grade. Moving back to Harper Springs wasn't an easy choice. The town had changed, older, quieter, but still carrying the weight of his absence. Some neighbors were gone softly when they saw him in the grocery store, eyes flicking between disbelief and guilt. Caleb didn't hold it against them. Small towns didn't forget, but they also didn't know how to ask for forgiveness. He rented a modest cottage 3 blocks from his mother's house. Teresa insisted on keeping his room the same, but he convinced her to turn it into a music room instead. They painted it pale green and filled it with instruments, stacks of sheet music, and a small couch where she often sat, sipping tea while he composed. At night, they took turns cooking dinner, laughing over who burned the rice or overspiced the chili. Sometimes they played old board games from the attic, their laughter overlapping like the harmonies Caleb now layered into his songs. But healing wasn't linear. Caleb started therapy with a trauma specialist in Little Rock, traveling twice a week. He spent hours untangling memory from imagination, learning which parts of his past were real and which were whispered lies. He wrote about it in a notebook, not unlike the one Teresa had once filled with lullabies. It was there he drafted the mission statement for Second Chord, the nonprofit launched 6 months later with the help of Detective Lopez and Maya, who handled logistics and outreach. Second Chord aimed to support displaced youth, especially those trafficked, abducted, or lost in the foster system, and also created a mentorship network for street musicians who used music to survive their own trauma. Caleb believed deeply in the healing power of melody. "A song kept me alive," he said at the launch of Field, held on the high school football field where his last school picture still hung in the administration office. "Kept me tethered to something I didn't remember, but still belonged to." The first fundraiser concert drew hundreds, including some who had searched for him all those years ago. As he played, Caleb scanned the crowd until he found Teresa, standing with her hands over her heart, tears shimmering in her eyes. He ended the set with "Row, Row, Row Your Boat," the same version she had once whispered into his dreams. The entire crowd joined in, voices overlapping in rounds, until the field vibrated with a chorus that felt like forgiveness. In the months that followed, Caleb recorded his first album under his real name. It was titled Comeback Season, and it climbed slowly, quietly, through streaming platforms, picked up by listeners who felt something true in its rawness. The closing track, simply called Home, featured Teresa humming behind the last verse. Every cent from the album supported Second Chord. Meanwhile, Roy's conviction made headlines across the region. Advocates for child protection pushed for stronger oversight in school transportation systems. Caleb and Teresa were invited to speak at legislative hearings, sharing not just what had gone wrong, but how long it had taken to be made right. Teresa told lawmakers, "You can't give me back the years I lost, but you can stop another parent from losing theirs." Her words helped pass a bill mandating real-time GPS and archival camera systems on all school buses in the state. On Caleb's 29th birthday, Teresa gave him back the notebook she'd kept hidden since 1995. Inside were letters she had written to him every year he was missing. He stayed up all night reading them, one by one, tears tracking slowly down his cheeks. At dawn, he wrote a new letter and slipped it between the pages. It read, "I'm home, I remember, I forgive." In the final days of autumn, Teresa walked the path she used to take to the bus stop every morning. The sidewalk was cracked in the same places. The mailbox at the corner still leaned slightly left. But this time, there was no ache in her chest, only gratitude. When she returned, Caleb was in the kitchen, singing softly as he stirred oatmeal. She joined in, off-key and perfect. Their harmony filled the room. The journey was no longer about what had been lost. It was about what had been found and what could now be shared softly. Caleb turned, smiled, and said, "Ready to go teach some chords, Ma?" Teresa nodded, slipped on her coat, and followed him out into a world finally wide enough to hold them both. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more narratives that uncover long-buried truths and quiet, powerful reunions. Let us know in the comments what moment hit you the hardest, and where in the world are you watching from. I read every comment and would love to hear your thoughts.